Welcome, friends who are tuning in to the 2022 Stat Bediaco Forum. My name is Al Tizon, and I am honored to contribute this presentation to the overall theme of our forum this year, which is Jesus and Empire. The title of my presentation is Mammon and Empire, Confronting the Root of All Evil. Jesus teaches us plainly that no one can serve two masters, that we cannot serve God and wealth. It's Matthew 6:23. Paul translated this teaching in more practical terms as he instructed his protege Timothy in his first letter to him, chapter 6, verses 9 and 10, which reads, "Those who want to be wealthy fall into temptation and are trapped by many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, and in their eagerness to be rich, some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pains." That's the way the passage reads in the New Revised Standard Version, which is what I usually read. But once in a great while, I like the way the King James Version says something, such as the case of 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10, which reads, "The love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." The KJV here says it so much more definitively, that the love of money is not a root of all sorts of evil, but the root of all evil, and that people who fall prey to it pierce or stab or even impale themselves with many deep and heavy and miserable sorrows. Now, this to me resonates much more with Jesus' black and white statement about the incompatibility of the love of wealth with the gospel. Jesus was not as either or about any other subject in the New Testament as he was with the pursuit of wealth or the love of money. Jesus was clear. Paul was clear. And for the first 300 years of the church's development, there is no indication that the Jesus people strayed from this teaching. Positively stated, for the first 300 years, the church remained faithful to the economics of the kingdom as they bore witness to the gospel throughout the Roman Empire. Now, granted, the opportunities for the Jesus people to benefit from the economics of Rome at that time were slim to nothing, as they were a marginalized and persecuted religious sect. Forced to the margins, the Jesus people took care of one another in every way. And from the margins, the church lived life under the reign of God, bearing witness to an alternative community amid the cruel, unjust, violent life of the empire. Part of the formation of the alternative community of Jesus people, the church, included a way of viewing and using material and monetary resources not as conduits through which one gets rich, but rather as the means to ensure that all were taken care of. They were a community where no one had need. "There was not a needy person among them," Luke wrote in Acts chapter 4. "For as many as owned lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold. They laid it at the apostles' feet," it says, "and it was distributed to each as any had need." Verses 34 and 35. As such, part of the witness of the alternative community was to say, in the context of empire, that socioeconomic justice is possible in Jesus Christ. Empire builders, of course, took offense and take offense today at such a notion, since it issues an inherent challenge to the injustices of the empire. In the case of market-based empires, the injustice is manifest in the cruel unevenness of wealth and poverty, the rich minority getting richer at the expense of the poor majority getting poorer. The challenge of this paper is aimed primarily at Christians who live in market-based societies. Socioeconomic injustice was and is the natural consequence of the pursuit of wealth, a cornerstone of market-based societies, because only the fittest survive and thrive, while the less fit and the unfit do not. The pursuit of wealth, which more often than not feeds the love of money, creates a system of class in which rights and privileges sit at the top and diminish as they trickle down. In a class system, socioeconomic injustice is perpetuated by the rich maintaining their privileged position by keeping the poor in their underprivileged position, which is called classism. The alternative community of Jesus' people was and is called to demonstrate another way. In every generation, God's people need to be reminded of the nature of the church's most formidable enemy, mammon, the root of all evil. The spirit behind the love of money or the pursuit of wealth is to be possessed by the spirit of mammon. Now, this reminder is not just so that individual believers can repent and adopt simpler and more generous lifestyles, although that definitely is included in the call, but also so that the faith community can practice socioeconomic justice amongst themselves as a prophetic witness against the unjust laws, policies, and practices of empire. I contend that mammon is the ultimate building block of empire throughout time. A simple definition of empire would be an ideology manifesting in a political entity, a kingdom, a nation, a state, etc., which is formed, maintained, and expanded by hegemonic power that is more often than not used to subdue, occupy, and exploit other peoples, lands, and resources. Empire, whether we call it Babylonian, Roman, Russian, Chinese, or American, forms, maintains, and expands by the power of mammon. Mammon enables empire. It drives it, maintains it, and grows it. The spirit of mammon is the spirit of empire. The power of mammon is the power of empire. The annihilation of whole cultures, the extermination and exploitation of peoples, the confiscation of lands, and so on, have been driven, I believe, primarily by the pursuit of wealth, by the love of money, by mammon. Classism drives all other isms, in my estimation, that empire creates, including racism. For example, in the case of the United States, the ethnocide of the hundreds of indigenous communities and the importation of Africans who fell victim to chattel slavery were driven by the vision to be the greatest nation on earth, which we should read or hear as a wealthy nation of European immigrants with unlimited freedom. Now, these overt acts of racism against the indigenous and enslaved Africans were the consequence of classism, the shiny, hypnotic vision of wealth that propelled people forward in pursuit of more money, more land, more resources, more luxury, without regard for anyone or anything else. So, friends, when the church challenges mammon, it challenges empire. And conversely, when it succumbs to mammon, it perpetuates empire. And such has been the case for the Christendom-soaked church throughout the last 2 millennia after Constantine. With few exceptions, the 4th century church and onward has not only not been a model of anti-empire, it has in fact become a vital part of empire building. Now, at this point, allow me to fast forward to the church's collusion with the development of capitalism, which has become the economy of today's most powerful empire, and its expansion throughout the world through the machinations of globalization. Eugene McCarraher's The Enchantments of Mammon, which I highly recommend, masterfully tells the history of capitalism, an economic system based on a philosophy of self-gain, making the case that it constituted the core of the making of the United States. Now, this is not a new idea, but McCarraher's argument that capitalism functions as much like a religion as it does an economic system might be. Or at least he developed it fully. He writes this: capitalism is a form of enchantment, and its animating spirit is money. He builds his case in part by arguing compellingly that the Puritan vision, which was a huge part of the making of the United States, contained this vision of the city on a hill, which had an unmistakable economic component to it. With the divine vision of the new nation in their purview, the Puritans set out to create, quote, a beloved community built on the foundations of capitalist enterprise, unquote. The illegitimate union between church and state, which we call Christendom, undoubtedly contributed to the making of the Western world. And elsewhere I offer a critique of this marriage. But the polygamous church had another mistress, the bank. The bank. McCarraher continues, the Puritan errand into the wilderness became an errand into the marketplace, and American life became an experiment in Christian friendship with unrighteous mammon. Max Weber's seminal work, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, connecting Protestant faith and the flourishing of democratic capitalism, still occupies a prominent place in Western socioeconomic theory. The principles emanating from the Reformation provided a way for Christians to see faith, wealth, and philanthropy seamlessly. As Melba Magai observes, Protestants saw business and wealth creation not as worldly, but as a vocation under God. Riches were seen as a byproduct of obedience and trust that called for social responsibility, unquote. A cruder version of what Magai says here is this: if you make me rich, God, I will give to the poor. Standing firm on the rock of capitalism, the rich and faithful today in capitalist societies are those who basically believe that one can serve God and mammon. In other words, Jesus was wrong when he said that you can't serve both. Or at least he didn't know and could not have known anything about the modern miracle of capitalism. Based on the belief that, quote, that human welfare is best served when persons with entrepreneurial gifts are free to be creatively self-centered. That's the definition of capitalism. It enables people to love God and get rich too. From this point of view, writes theologian William Pennell, Jesus was a nice man, but basically naive about all things economic. Well, needless to say, such notions make a mockery of Jesus and the good news to the poor that he preached. The church's affair with mammon needs to be named, confessed, and discontinued in order to recover the integrity of the gospel and the church's prophetic witness against empire. This is a very tall order in the context of the church's full embrace of the market as a way of life. It will take nothing less than deep conversion and a recovery of the mission of the church to demonstrate to empire what life can be like under the reign of Christ. And integral to that picture is socio-economic justice. Now, I go more deeply into what the church needs to be and do in order to loosen mammon's grip on the church for the sake of the world in my upcoming book, Christ Among the Classes. Please look for it. It's going to be released in the spring of 2023. For now, allow me to speak specifically about how we need to consider a different way of doing intercultural mission. For the way it's currently done right now from the West and increasingly from the non-West is cursed with imperial structures. Scott Bessenecker calls the aggregate of these imperial structures the Christian industrial complex. Taking his cue from former U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower, describing the unholy alliance between the military and commerce as the military-industrial complex, Bessenecker identifies as an uncanny similarity in the unholy alliance between church and commerce, and he calls that the Christian industrial complex. Bessenecker's basic thesis is that the modern missionary movement germinated around the same time that the commercial corporation as a manifestation of capitalism came into prominence. He writes, in this organizational design, money is the central factor in decision-making. Employees are valued mainly for their productivity. Demand can be manipulated by marketing, and consumers are seen exclusively through the lens of their ability to purchase the product. In time, the way of the corporation became the unquestioned way to get things done, to make progress, to accomplish significant objectives in every sector of society, including the church and its mission. Bessenecker continues, at that time it was axiomatic that if someone had a passion to advance anything in foreign lands, even Christian mission, a corporation needed to be formed, complete with investors, boards of directors, executive officers, employees, recruiters, and accountants. The result was a missionary corporation, a Christian version of the for-profit trading company, unquote. Now, it's difficult not to be troubled by such insights. And I see much more clearly why many of the problems that we encounter in the missionary-host relationship has to do with money and power. Folks, I know this is a hard statement to make here, but the church in the West, the capitalist-based societies that are sending out missionaries, has helped to expand empire throughout the world by way of the Christian missionary industrial complex. So how do we correct this? If corporate capitalism is truly the foundation of our whole system, I mean, do we need to take a wrecking ball to the whole thing and start over? I don't think we should rule that out, honestly. But as we think about it, more modest proposals would include taking seriously alternative mission structures that have emerged on the scene, bivocational ministry or mission, or what used to be called tent making, has made somewhat of a comeback. Good thing. K.P. Yohanan popularized the training of local indigenous missionaries and creative ways to partner with them from afar. Diaspora mission, where Christians who migrate for employment and or other reasons are trained to bear witness to the gospel in their host countries. That represents another radically different approach to mission. Though these less cumbersome alternatives have not posed a significant threat to the Christian industrial complex, they demonstrate alternate possibilities. And it's time to take seriously innovative structures that rely less on capital. In Chapter 2 of Overturning Tables, Bessenecker contrasts the structure through which the supposedly first North American missionaries, Adoniram and Ann Judson, were sent to Burma, with a much less cumbersome structure through which George and Hannah Lyle were sent as missionaries to Jamaica 2 decades before the Judsons set sail. While the Judsons pioneered a way of missionary sending by proposing a plan to be approved spiritually and financially by a denominational board and then raising the needed funds within local churches to support the plan, which is a corporate model, the Lyles attached themselves to a family that enabled them to serve in Jamaica with the full moral support of their congregation. Though the Lyle model of mission, of indenturing oneself to a master to gain passage to Jamaica, is not replicable today, it demonstrated in his day great resolve, ingenious creativity, and a non-corporate based approach to mission. If we apply these same traits today, what mission structures might emerge? This is a crucial question. For as Bessenecker prophetically reminds us, we are more than the business we have become. Challenging the Christian industrial complex by striving in the spirit to find less capital-based ways of doing mission at least begins the process of conversion that the church desperately needs to undergo if it desires to weaken the power of mammon and simultaneously undermine the imperial spirit, whose headwinds are blowing more aggressively today throughout the world. Thank you.